Here we are, the first Sunday of Advent. And Advent is one of those words that you don't hear very much, except for at churches, really. You don't hear people talk about Advent too often. There's not a lot of Advent sales. There's not a lot of, Advent bonuses or Advent signs or, but we come to church and we have an Advent wreath. And we talk about the first Sunday of Advent, this first Sunday of this season leading up to Christmas. I mean, in the world, the Christmas season in a lot of ways begins, right after Halloween for some people, as the Christmas decorations appear in the stores, and for so many, the coming of Christmas is that coming of profit, the Black Friday. And the term Black Friday means, the time when businesses will go into the black, will move from the red and into the black. But here in churches, we talk about Advent, this word that means coming. What is coming? And the obvious answer is yes, Christmas is coming. Santa is coming. Carols are coming. Parties are coming. Decorations and mistletoe and wreaths and Christmas trees and ornaments and cleaning up the house and preparing meals and making lists and inviting friends over and calendars that are full of Christmas pageants and plays, and maybe the snow is coming a little bit, and maybe that means the plows are coming. Lots of things are coming. The end of the semester might be coming. Lots of stress and finals. Year-end things to do at work. Christmas is coming. A few days off, but that might also mean more work to prepare for it. Lists need to be made, and shopping needs to be done, and cards need to be written and sent, and Christmas is coming. To some is great joy, and then to others, and maybe even to the same person, depending on what day or time or mood they may be in, is also a time of great stress. Maybe our memories are coming. Maybe lonely nights are coming. What's coming? If you look around the world, you can't help but wonder what's coming. Is more violence coming? Is deeper fear coming? Is retribution coming? Are wider gaps of racism and rage coming? In the midst of all that may be coming, it's hard sometimes to think about this Advent season. With all in the world that seems to be coming, crashing perhaps, it can be hard sometimes to say hope is coming. Because if you look around, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope. I mean, you wouldn't think there's a lot of hope in the world when it seems like every week there's another violent act. There's another group of people that are oppressed, that are upset. There's another person that sacrifices himself for others and is the only thing he gets back is violence. So what's coming? It's a hard question to ask, to really take a hard look at what's going on in our lives, in our world. When we look at what is coming, it's not an easy answer. And still in the midst of this, Christmas is coming. Christmas is coming, whether we like it or not. So how do we prepare? When something's coming, there's lots of ways that we prepare for Christmas. There's lots of ways that we can prepare for this coming of Christ that we celebrate. And you can look around and see some of the preparations that we've made, some physical preparations, the tree and the gifting tree, the wreaths, the greens that are hung. There's ways all around us that we're preparing for this coming of Christ. And last Sunday, we gathered to put this stuff up, to put up the Christmas wreath, and to hang the hanging of the greens. And afterwards, we shared this prayer. And many of you were here, and it was a wonderful afternoon, evening. But at the end, after we were done with the work of hanging and putting up the trees, we gathered here in this place, and we asked this question: how shall we prepare our hearts for the coming of the Son of God? And we responded with these words: by hearing again the words of the prophets, by singing the songs of the ages, by sharing in fellowship of brothers and sisters in Christ, by welcoming the stranger, feeding the hungry, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. This is the prayer we shared. And that first thing, to hearing the word of the prophets, this is the time that the prophets, especially in our readings and our scriptures, kind of come alive again, because the prophets were all about what is coming. A lot of what they did was talking about what is coming, and they didn't have a lot of good news, the prophets. Jeremiah is our prophet for this morning, and this is the 33rd chapter of Jeremiah, and I can summarize the first 32 chapters of Jeremiah with this: things are bad and they're going to get worse. Jeremiah the prophet, so much of what he said was warning, because he knew what was coming. Destruction was coming. Vengeance was coming. And he declared it was because we've failed, we've forgotten our God, we've forgotten to love God the way we're supposed to. We worship idols instead. We chase these gods of fertility and the god of rain and the god of this. We chase Baal and Asherah, and we set up these false idols, and we pretend we give lip service to Yahweh our God, but really we're more invested in all these other things. And we forget about the widow, and we forget about the orphan, and we oppress the poor. And Jeremiah said over and over again, you keep doing these things and bad things are coming. There wasn't a lot of good news as far as the prophet Jeremiah was concerned. And then it happened. The exile happened. And this time when Jeremiah worked and wrote, there was a time of great upheaval. When the people of Judah, the city was destroyed, their temple was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And the warnings that Jeremiah said were coming came. And the temple, the very house of God, the center of their life, the center of their world, the center of their stability, was destroyed. The law was lost. The people were scattered. Some were taken into exile, literally taken from their homes and moved to a foreign land, moved as refugees into a place that they didn't want to be, because the power of Nebuchadnezzar forced them there. And here in the midst of exile, Jeremiah's tone changes. He talked forever about the covenant that was going to end, because Jeremiah knew that there was a promise that God had made, but Jeremiah knew that this promise only lasted as long as the people were faithful. And he said, this is coming, and it did. And then Jeremiah said, but a new time is coming, declares the Lord. In the midst of the exile, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the news all around that called for absolutely there was no evidence of hope, Jeremiah told the people what was coming. When that question would have been right on their mind. What's coming now? Where is our God? Our temple's destroyed. Our people are scattered. Where is God now? What is coming? And here was Jeremiah's answer. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill my gracious promise with the people of Israel and Judah. In those days and at that time, I'll raise up a righteous branch from David's line, who will do what is just and right in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, Jerusalem will be in safety, and this is what he will be called: the Lord is our righteousness. Twice the word righteous is used there. God will raise up a righteous branch. He will be called the Lord is our righteousness. That's a big word, isn't it? That's a tough word to unpack. Righteousness has a lot of different meanings. There's a lot of weight to it. There's a lot of baggage on that word, righteous. But a couple things to be reminded of Jeremiah's word here to the people. It was one, first of all, this is not something new. Yes, the time was coming that something new would happen, and yet it was connected deeply to a promise that existed before this time and this place. This branch that God would use was one that was already planted, that the roots were deep. And God was going to use what was already there to create something, to renew something, to restore something that was lost. To restore righteousness. Now, it's important to note, not to restore self-righteousness. Because we know what that is, right? We know what self-righteousness is. I don't think we need any more of that. Self-righteousness is that understanding of the world through the lens of me. It's this weird thing that the self-righteous isn't so concerned about themselves. They're very concerned. You think that self-righteous means you'd only be concerned about yourself. But self-righteousness really means you're very concerned about what everybody else is doing through the lens of me. So I can look through and see what others are through how great I am. Self-righteousness is that understanding that I am the law. I am the way. I am the standard, and I can judge you by how I act. And we've got plenty of self-righteousness. But God said there's a time when the people will declare, that righteous branch will declare, the Lord is our righteousness. Righteousness is the way. It's the way you live, right living. It's the path you take. Righteousness is the path you lead as a person, as a people. It's that path. And the Lord's righteousness, not self-righteousness. The Lord's righteousness is that path of justice. It's that path of peace. That path of graciousness, right? The righteous branch will do what is just and right. This is what's coming. A time when the Lord's righteousness, the Lord's way, the Lord's justice, the Lord's grace, the Lord's peace, the Lord's love is the way of the world. And Jeremiah was able to say that in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of no signs of hope. He built his word on God's promise. He was able to restore the hope of the people on God's promise that something else was coming. He could look around and see that there was devastation and destruction, yet he was still able to see through God. Not his own righteousness, but through God's righteousness, and he was able to see that there was still hope. And so we're called to still ask that question, what's coming? What's coming? And just as Jeremiah was able to see a future that was God's future of hope and justice and reconciliation, we can see the same. When we prepare for Christ, we prepare for righteousness, for God's righteousness. When we prepare for Christmas, we prepare our hearts for that restored hope, for that new vision of what the way the world could be. And it begins in our hearts. It begins with how we see the world. When we say Christ is coming, Christmas is coming, and we put up decorations, and we sing carols, and we buy presents, that's not the preparation we're looking for. Because if we put up greens and we're not willing to welcome a stranger, what good is it? If we're preparing a great feast for our family and we're not willing to feed the hungry, what's the point? If we're buying gifts for everyone we know and lavishing presents on people, and we're not willing to sacrifice for the poor, for someone we don't know, then what are we doing? If we go to a store and we're not kind to the people that are there serving us, if we go to a store and we get upset because somebody has the gall to say happy holidays, who are we following? What are we preparing for? The Lord's righteousness. Sunday, we prepared this place. We hung these greens and we shared some music and we shared laughter and we bickered over if the things were hung in the right way, and we said move over a little bit, and we made sure the ornaments were all in the right place, and we did all of this, and then we prayed these words, and then we ate together, and we shared this meal, and we shared laughter, and we shared fellowship, and then a stranger showed up. He showed up at the door and he said, I saw the light was on and I was hungry. Now, 45 minutes earlier, we had prayed these words. How do we prepare our hearts for the coming of the Son of God? By welcoming the stranger, feeding the hungry, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And so this man with his coat that was dirty and his bag where he probably was carrying most of what he owned, who kind of talked to himself a little bit, came in and he sat at the table and we gave him a bowl of soup. We did more than that. Somebody, he's here, sat with him and chatted with him and heard a story a little bit. And offered not just a bowl of soup, but for a moment a friend. For a moment a relationship. For a moment a warm place, not just that was warm in temperature. And then another scramble when we filled another bowl that could be sealed, and then somebody else bagged up a bunch of Rice Krispie treats, and somebody else poured the apple cider, and then it was time to go. I think he hugged every single person that was there. Who knows when the last time he was hugged? When we hang these greens, when we light this candle, when we decorate a tree, when we come here every Sunday, we don't just do it because Christmas is coming and that's what we do. We don't just do it because, well, we were Christian, we were raised that way, and so that's what you do. You show up on Sunday. We do it because we hear God calling us to something more, God calling us to community, God calling us to fellowship that matters to people's lives. We prepare not just these halls, but we prepare our hearts. That even in the midst of the darkness, even in the midst of the violence, even in the midst of the strangers and the isolation and the loneliness, we can gather here, the people of God, and say, come. There is hope. By God, there is hope. So we come and we prepare for what is coming. What is coming? Christ is coming. And Christ is present. The promises that Jeremiah made are fulfilled when we live God's righteousness. When we follow Christ's righteousness and not our own. When we prepare our hearts, minds, and lives for kindness and grace. This is how we know Christmas is coming. This is how we know Christ is here. This is how we know. This is how we declare. The Lord is our righteousness.